Neymar was never supposed to fail. That was the problem. Brazil had decided his destiny before he was old enough to decide it himself. One name, one kid, one impossible wait. And the moment he touched the ball, really touched it, you understood why. Because there are players who are good. And then there are players who make you stop whatever you're doing. Neymar was the second kind. At 17, that kind of talent doesn't come around often. And when it does, the world doesn't just watch. It expects. Santos FC, late 2000s. A skinny teenager from Mogi das Cruzes was doing things with a football that coaches couldn't teach. Neymar da Silva Santos Jr. Nobody called him that, just Neymar. One name. Already. He was 17 years old, and Santos were building their entire identity around him. Not because they planned to, because they had no choice. He was that good. The weight that came with that was something nobody really talked about. Brazil doesn't just love football. Brazil lives football. It's woven into the culture in a way that's difficult to explain if you didn't grow up with it. And when a boy from a working-class family starts playing like God on grass, the country doesn't just admire him. They claim him. They project everything onto him. Every hope, every expectation, every ghost of every legend who came before. They called him the next Pelé. Let that land for a second. The next Pelé. Not just a good player, not just a star. The successor to the greatest footballer in Brazilian history. Neymar was a teenager when these comparisons started. 17, 18, 19. And with every brilliant performance, with every goal, with every ridiculous piece of skill in the Santos colors, the expectation didn't just grow, it compounded. By the time he was 20, Brazil had already decided his destiny. 2014 World Cup. Home soil. The boy who would lift the trophy in front of his own people. It was already written. In the newspapers. In the conversations. In the dreams of an entire nation. Nobody asked Neymar if he wanted that weight on his back. They just put it there. At Santos, he was untouchable. He scored goals that didn't make sense. He dribbled past 4 players in spaces that shouldn't exist. There's footage from his Santos years, and if you've seen it, you know what it felt like watching something that looked almost unfair. The Brazilian crowd, those Santos fans, they weren't just cheering for goals. They were cheering because they were watching something rare, something that felt chosen. Barcelona came calling in 2013, and this felt like destiny confirming itself. When Neymar walked into that dressing room, he wasn't walking into a club. He was walking into arguably the greatest football team in history. Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, and Messi. Leo Messi, who at that point was already being described as the best player who had ever lived. Neymar knew this. He'd known it before he signed. But knowing something and experiencing it are completely different things. For the first few months, there was an adjustment, a settling, a feeling out period where Barcelona fans were patient, expectant, curious. And then something clicked. Something that nobody fully predicted. Neymar didn't fight the system. He joined it. He moved out wide, gave Messi the center, and became something extraordinary within a team that was already extraordinary. 2014 to 15. MSN, Messi, Suarez, Neymar. If you watched Barcelona that season, you watched something that felt almost illegal. These 3 forwards moved like they shared one brain. The combinations, the understanding, the goals. Neymar finished that season with 59 goal contributions. Barcelona won the treble. And in those moments, watching Neymar run at defenders, watching the Camp Nou rise to its feet, watching him celebrate with his arm around Messi, it felt like everything had worked. The kid from Santos had arrived. Properly, undeniably, but the story was becoming more complicated. The Messi shadow wasn't something the media invented. It was real. Every conversation about Neymar eventually became a conversation about Messi. Who was better? Could Neymar lead a team the way Messi could? Was Neymar the player, or was he a spectacular complement to the player? These questions followed him everywhere, And the longer he stayed at Barcelona, the louder they got. Neymar won trophies. He scored crucial goals. He had seasons that most footballers could only dream of. And still. The narrative never quite let him stand alone. In 2017, Paris Saint-Germain paid €222 million to change that. The decision divided football. It still does. People understood the logic. Go somewhere you're the main man, build your own legacy, get out from the shadow. Paris. The lights, the city, the ambition of a club trying to become a European superpower. On paper, it made complete sense. In practice, the criticism was instant and relentless. He'd left the greatest club in the world, people said. He'd chosen money over competition, comfort over challenge, marketing over football. None of that was entirely fair. But in football, fair doesn't really come into it. At PSG, Neymar was extraordinary in flashes. When he was fit, when he was locked in, when he was fully Neymar, defenders genuinely looked afraid of him. There were nights in Paris where he picked up the ball on the left, cut inside, and the entire stadium just waited, held its breath, because they knew something was coming. That feeling, that collective held breath, only a handful of players in history have ever created that. But the injuries came. The first metatarsal, right before the Champions League quarter-final second leg against Real Madrid in 2018. Then another. And each time Neymar went down, holding his foot or his ankle or his hamstring, the narrative shifted a little more. He became a player associated with absence as much as brilliance. And in football, brutal as it sounds, you are only as present as your last game. The criticism became something else entirely. Not just about club choices or tactics. Personal. His lifestyle, his parties, his personality. There were stories, incidents, controversies that clouded everything. And Brazilian fans, those same fans who had projected everything onto him as a boy, began to turn. Slowly at first, then decisively. The whistles at games, the public criticism from legends of the game, former Brazil players who had watched him as a teenager saying publicly that he'd lost his way. For a man who had carried Brazil's hope since he was a teenager, that was a specific kind of pain, but nothing compared to what happened in 2014, Brazil hosting the World Cup. The script Neymar was born to finish. He'd been brilliant in the tournament. Goals, assists, carrying the team on his back exactly the way they'd always asked him to. And then against Colombia, a knee to the back, a fractured vertebra. Neymar stretched off the pitch in tears, unable to move, unable to breathe properly, and the dream, his dream, Brazil's dream, left with him. Brazil fell apart without him. 7-1 to Germany. The Mineirazo, the worst result in Brazilian football history. It happened while Neymar watched from a hospital bed in a neck brace. He never said this publicly, but people who were close to the squad said it for him. Neymar felt responsible, not for the result. He couldn't have changed that. But for not being there, for not being able to will his broken body through it. The weight of a nation's heartbreak, sitting on top of everything else he'd already been asked to carry. That's the thing about Neymar's story that gets lost sometimes. We talk about what he achieved, and it was remarkable. He won La Liga, the Copa del Rey, the Champions League, the Copa America. He scored hundreds of professional goals. On pure statistics and trophies, his career would be considered exceptional by almost any standard. But reasonable was never the standard they set for him. The standard was Pelé. The standard was the World Cup in his hands. The standard was undisputed. The best in the world. Not one of them. Not close to it. The best. And that is a completely different thing to be asked to be, especially when the person standing next to you for 4 years was arguably the most talented footballer ever born. Did Neymar fail? Or did we fail him? There's a version of this story where Neymar, the kid from Mogi das Cruzes, who taught himself to play on concrete pitches, who dragged Santos to a Copa Libertadores, who scored the goal that sealed a treble at Barcelona. where that Neymar is remembered as one of the great players of his generation. And there's the version that exists in the gap between what he was and what everyone needed him to be. That version is harsher, less forgiving. That's the version that lives in the comment sections, in the pundit debates, in the quiet way Brazilian fans lower their eyes when his name comes up. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, as it usually is. What's undeniable is this: there have been very few players in football history who made you feel what Neymar made you feel. That electricity, that stomach drop when he received the ball in space, that sense that something impossible was about to happen, that was real. That was always real. He was never supposed to fail. Maybe that was always the problem. And if you enjoy football stories like this, the pressure, the expectations, the moments nobody talks about, there are more waiting for you here.